One of the things that Jim models as well as anybody in his preaching, week to week, is a demonstration of how the Bible is a double-edged sword. Jesus said the Bible is a double-edged sword. Read Scripture enough, and you start to realize that if a passage seems simple and straightforward, you just haven't read far enough. The more you read, the more likely you are to find passages that seem to contradict one another. Some people use those instances of seeming contradiction to dismiss the whole Bible. Others come to those places and just close their Bible and close their minds and stick with the few comforting scriptures they happen to like. Very few dare to ask, what deeper truths can I learn by seeing the Bible cut both ways? How much richer can my understanding be? And we want to be counted among those few. Acts 10 is a terrific case in point. In these weeks after Christmas, the lectionary has leaped all the way over the stories of Jesus' earthly life, past his death and resurrection, and now in Acts, all the disciples have been scattered, smothered, diced, and covered. And here in chapter 10, we find Peter on a rooftop in Joppa, hanging with Gentiles and having a big breakthrough. So most of us think that Peter's breakthrough in Acts 10 is simple and straightforward. We have heard this before. This is the story where Peter learned that Jesus came to be the disciple for all people. We remember that despite all the time walking and talking with Jesus in person, witnessing firsthand his ministry, Peter, not the sharpest knife in the drawer, was still stuck thinking of Jesus as an exclusively Jewish Messiah, sent to save the Jews. Sure, he had a strange habit of wandering into unclean territory and mixing with the locals, but still, a Jew for Jews. It's here on the rooftop in Joppa that he finally grasps that only God can declare someone unclean, and that Jesus is the Messiah for Gentiles or non-Jews too. We've heard verses 34 through 36 before. I truly understand that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. And Peter then describes how the good news of this lordship spreads in every direction to people of all kinds, and that the intention is for it to reach all persons, and it ends with, He is Lord of all. Wonderful. Except that's not all Peter said. This expanding inclusiveness is only part of what Peter is realizing. The other part, the part we tend not to read so often, is there in verse 40. God raised him on the third day and allowed him to appear not to all people. Not to all people, but to those of us who were chosen as his witnesses. Now, wait a minute. If God's intention is to reach all people, why not show the evidence to all people? Haven't you ever wondered that? Is this gospel for everyone or not? Of course, Peter's just telling the truth. Jesus didn't appear to all people, just a few. But why? Doesn't God realize how bad this looks politically? Doesn't God understand that this lack of transparency opens the whole story up to suspicion and ridicule, accusations that the whole thing is just a hoax, or the self-delusions of a bunch of grief-stricken cult members? What possible good reason could there be for the resurrected Jesus to appear only to a chosen few? Well, we do know that there are some serious downsides to mass marketing. In the name of evangelism, American Christianity has too often treated people like numbers and the gospel as nothing more than information. As if the Christian life is really just a big game of tag where you sneak up on unsuspecting people and say, Jesus is Lord, you're it. And then it's up to them to go tell everyone else they can as many people as they can before they die. I once heard a chaperone at a youth camp say, well, the important thing is we get these kids saved no matter how we do it. As if we had the power to save anybody, and as if the way we go about it doesn't matter. Peter is learning that it matters. There's a big sign in front of a church not far from here that says, "A place for you." And the kind of giant letters that you see on a billboard for used cars or a new resort or pizza. Maybe that speaks to you. To me, the attempt to say something personal in a context that is so impersonal rings hollow and insincere. It creates cognitive dissonance that makes me think, a place for me? You don't even know me. You're just a sign. A bit of copycat commercialism borrowed from a soft drink ad. There's no relationship here. You are not a person, and I am not a person to you. I'm just the great they outside your walls. Someone who could be anyone. Your interest is not about me. You hope to attract to get your numbers up so you can feel successful and then go put up more signs. This is about your kingdom. Every money-making enterprise and every special interest in the world has the same come on for me. I've learned how to tell when I'm just a number in someone else's game. I won't be fooled by that. Isn't it clear that if God's intention was simply to get information to every person, God could do it instantly and directly? I mean, if we can build satellites that broadcast to the whole world, surely God can do it. If God can fill the sky over shepherds with heavenly hosts, surely God can hire them for another gig. If we are saved by information, if Donald Trump can tweet, surely God can figure it out. But maybe that's not what God has in mind. Peter is realizing that both things are true, that God sends Jesus to be the Messiah for all people. But he revealed that not to all people, but to a chosen few. And the chosen few are those, look at verse 41. The chosen few are those he ate and drank with. And it turns out that is no small thing. When biblical archaeologist Charles Page, who lived and worked in Jerusalem for 3 decades, came to Furman to speak to us, he told us that the Bedouins who live in tents around Jerusalem to this day still keep the tradition that to give someone a cup of cold water was to create a pact of friendship for a whole year. But to eat and drink with them in their home, to eat and drink with them, is a pact of friendship for life. He says that over there, when a friendship breaks up, they don't mourn that friendship by saying, "Oh, we fought in the war together," or "Oh, I danced at his daughter's wedding." They say, "And we ate together." What a tragic loss. We ate together. Friends for life. Does that change the way you see the story of the woman at the well? Or the story of Zacchaeus? Or the Last Supper? Or the last breakfast on the beach? Jesus reserved the greatest news in history for his closest friends, those who had laughed and cried and sung and suffered with him. They would be the ones to bear the message to the rest of us, because the message is more than information. It's more than a password or a magic incantation. It's more than can be communicated in a tract or a trinket. God chose that the gospel make its way in the world through friendships. Through friendships. Committed relationships of trust. The gospel is a bond between persons. It is a new bond that turns enemies into friends and outcasts into family members and total strangers with nothing in common into church. And this is why the great culmination of what God has done in Christ is not a data network. It is a peaceable kingdom. Peter realized that not only was Jesus sent to save the world, but that friendship is the way God chose to reach the world. Isn't that obvious? Aren't you here today less because of doctrine than because of relationships? Isn't that the message of Jim Dant's amazing story? And isn't it apparent in all Jesus has done? Jesus could not become best friends with every soul on earth in 3 years' time, so he invested deeply in a few, showing them how it's done, so that when he was no longer present, the place among them, his place among them, would be filled by a stranger, and the circle of friends would grow. Look, we could try to make this as religious as we want. We can wrap it in big theological words. But if there is not at the heart of all we do the substance of friendship, so evident that a child can recognize it, then all of this is a facade. The power of the gospel, Peter now sees it, is not just its far-reaching breadth, it is its interpersonal depth. I love the way friendship is described in an old Arabian proverb. It goes like this: a friend is someone with whom you can pour out all the contents of your heart, chaff and grain together, knowing that the gentlest of hands will take it and sift it and keep what is worth keeping, and with a breath of kindness blow the rest away. Well, you say, if that's so, why be a Christian at all? Non-Christians can have meaningful friendships without the tithing, without having to get out on a day like this. I want to be clear to say that secular friendships are by no means less legitimate than Christian ones, by no means. But there are some things that set Christian friendships apart. And this is what is so beautifully described in our Old Testament reading from today. Look at Isaiah 42:6. And see that first, this kind of friendship is initiated by God. The same God who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives breath to people on the earth and spirit to those who walk in it. That is to say, this God who doesn't need us has taken us by the hand and kept us, making a covenant between us. God has initiated this kind of friendship. And secondly, notice that this kind of friendship may represent Christ's inner circle, but it is never a closed circle. It's not a clique or a dinner club or a fraternity or a sorority. This kind of friendship is a light of hope to outsiders, to strangers, to foreigners, to immigrants, infected persons, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and atheists, people from North Carolina, people who, I'm going to touch the third rail here, people who may not be pulling for Clemson this weekend. Peter, who actually walked and talked with Jesus, look at this, he doesn't fully grasp Jesus' own ministry until he finds himself sharing food and drink with a Gentile, and experiencing with a Gentile the same kind of friendship he experienced with Jesus. Aha! That's when he understood not only that Jesus came to reach the whole world, but how he chose to reach it. Christianity may be more than friendship, but it is certainly nothing less. So perhaps today you are a nominated deacon, about to be ordained, and you're thinking, what in the wide world of sports have I gotten myself into? Or maybe you're a long-time church member who can't find a way to make new an old and flagging faith, to bring vitality to it. Or maybe you have never made a commitment to Christ because of some doctrinal conundrum, some theological speed bump has created too much cognitive dissonance for you to hear the good news. Does it sound different if I say what you're being called to is friendship? You know, the last time I spoke to the deacons, I told them a story about a church member I knew who lost her adult daughter to cancer and who went all the way to Kentucky to care for her, weeks on end, only to come home empty-handed, enduring the kind of grief that no parent should ever have to endure. Do you know when I saw her next? The very next time I saw her was at a funeral for the adult son of another family in our church. Friends of hers who loved and lost a young man also gone too soon. I scanned the room, and there she stood, having climbed whatever mountain it took to get out of bed and feed and dress herself and make her way across town just to stand in silent solidarity with others enduring the same grief. Who are your true friends? Who has shown you grace and forgiveness? Who has given you a safe space to be vulnerable, to grieve? A togetherness from which you gained unexpected strength. Who comes to mind when you think of your friends? And who comes to mind when you think about someone who needs a friend? Who is that? And then think about this. What kind of friend do you, in your heart of hearts, most want to be?